Hi, everyone. It is Tuesday, June 13th. Welcome to Talk Back. I have a very important show today because we're going to talk about an issue that really needs to be more in the spotlight in our culture. Let me ask you, what kind of relationship do you have with older people? Do you have grandparents? Do you revere them? Do you respect them? Do you learn from them? You know, our culture is getting kind of a youth concentration. And in other cultures around the world, the elderly are revered. They're revered for their wisdom. They live with their relatives until they die. In America, we need a lot of work to bring back that kind of reverence and care. And as the adult population is exploding, it's exploding, and we are living longer, we need more care, more involvement with the younger people, more involvement by government and our community. And so in Eastern Connecticut, in our community, where we are surrounded by Safe Futures, which is the organization that deals with help for domestic violence and trauma to families, we need to concentrate on the elder population because they are being harmed by the forces in our society all around us. They're living alone, or they're living in nursing homes, or they're living with spouses, and the people that care about them the most, or are supposed to, the ones they trust and rely on the most, are often the ones that fail them, that cheat them, that defraud them, that harm them both physically, financially, emotionally. And it can be the caretakers, the nursing home personnel, the clergy, the lawyers, and the scammers that are out there. We know that's a huge problem. So I have three experts who each have a separate niche to help us talk about this problem. We're developing a task force from Safe Futures so that Safe Futures can expand its reach in the community to deal with the elder problem. So we have experts here on elder care, elder law, elder abuse. Let me first introduce Christine Foster, who is from Safe Futures. She is the Director of Child and Family Services and also directs the Camp Hope program for kids that have been affected by domestic violence. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Sheila.
All right. So tell me, how do you fit into this puzzle? What aspect of figuring out what we need to do for the elderly in our community are you working on?
Well, basically, Safe Futures really just wants our community to know that we are a resource for elders. We serve victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and stalking in southeastern Connecticut. And I think we have a really strong reputation for responding to domestic violence. But when people hear those words, they often think of intimate partner violence. They think of couples that are experiencing violence. But we know that abuse doesn't always look that way. It can be very different, and it can impact anyone in a family from infants up to our elders. And we just really want to make sure that our community knows that we are here for all of those people, not just one specific subset.
We want at one point, Safe Futures used to be named the Women's Center of Eastern Connecticut, right?
That is true. They changed their name. It was before my time there, but changed their name to Safe Futures because they wanted our name to reflect that as well, that in fact we provide services to all genders.
Exactly. And in the same vein, we want the elderly community to know that Safe Futures is there for them too. Safe Futures is just one. I mean, Elena and Mark can talk about other organizations and resources that exist in this community, but we would like Safe Futures to be a center, at least as an entry point for many people who might use the hotline, which we are featuring on our screen right now, to at least get into the issue. And then from there, through your work, Chris, and then through Elena and Mark, we can get further into helping people with where they need help the most. So let me introduce Elena Goggin. Elena is the founder and director of an organization called Elder Life Care Planning. She's a certified elder care coordinator. She's got a lot of experience. Tell me about your program, why you started it, what is your passion about doing this work?
Oh, thank you, Sheila, for the invitation to be here. About 16 years ago, I got introduced to an elder law firm that was talking about life care planning. And what was meaningful to me during that time was looking at not only where somebody was right in the moment during a crisis that they were navigating, but what was going on after that and helping them navigate those life care challenges or life challenges in general. So our company that I designed around those issues sought to help people beyond just a Medicaid application, beyond a care coordination, and introduce options for care, not just where they are today, but also to look into their future. So they weren't concerned about that what-if conversation that often happens with people when they're not completely serviced 100%. So that's what our hope is, and that's what we do.
Okay, we'll get more details into exactly what you do later. And now, Mark, the next part of the care package for elder people, and we're going to try to take an example and see how each of our organizations goes through it to work on it. You're an attorney with many years of experience, and you're specializing now in elder law. So tell us about why is that an important field, and what passion do you have about working in that area?
So I have, and by the way, thank you, Sheila, for the invitation as well. I have been practicing law now for 31 years. It's hard to believe 31 years has gone by that fast, but for the vast majority of my experience, I was a general practice attorney. But I had the good fortune a little over 8 years ago of joining the firm that I'm with now. The name of the firm is Chipperoni and Zaccaro, and we have 2 offices, a main office in New London and a satellite office in Woodbury, Connecticut on the western side of the state. And the firm emphasizes really 4 areas, but 3 are relevant for this purposes of this discussion, and that is we do a lot of estate planning for people, probate court work of all kinds, and elder law. And it's wide and it's varied. We have 4 lawyers in the firm. What drew me to the firm, there were a lot of things, I suppose. The composition of the firm is outstanding. I practice with 3 excellent attorneys, and we have a terrific support staff. One of our attorneys is not just a lawyer, but he's a certified financial planner. Another one of our attorneys, who Ellen knows, is a certified elder law attorney. You have to actually sit for an exam, pass the exam to have that designation. He also holds his Master of Laws in Taxation. And then the last attorney is much like me, comes to the firm with a general practice background, but we have all emphasized the areas of probate court work, estate planning, and elder law. I happen to be married to a geriatric social worker, and you know, we talk shop, as you can imagine, over the years. And this area of the law has always been an attractive area for me for a lot of reasons, not the least of which you just want to try to help people as much as you can and guide them through some very difficult situations in their lives. A lot of the situations, frankly, arise from a lack of planning. And all of a sudden it's crisis management, and you're sort of, you know, navigating people through the legal morass, as they say,
Right.
to get to a positive result.
So just to clarify, probate court is the place you go to for state reasons. If there's a will that needs to be probated, you need to go to the court to resolve how a person's estate is going to be finally distributed and taken care of. That right?
There are a number of reasons you could
Yeah.
wind up in probate court.
Right.
You know, whether you die with or without a will,
Right.
you have to go through the probate court to probate your estate. But I have to tell you, right now I have various and sundry conservatorship matters pending,
Right.
and they all seem to be contentious for some reason. So, you know, I've been finding myself in a lot of probate courts lately,
Right. So that's
dealing with who
another
should be a
thing.
conservator.
Probate court also does guardianship and
Right.
issues involving children
Exactly.
and their care. And yes, aside from the issue of estate planning and wills and that, conservatorships deal with issues where people want to take over the decision making that elder people that feel that they either cannot do, not capable of doing, or maybe there's a contest about it, and they take over both their affairs of their personhood and of their finances, right? And that's an issue. We're going to talk a little bit more
Sure.
about that too as we go along, because sometimes that's an area of abuse. Somebody might
That's exactly right.
some family member might aim to put their parent into guardianship or into conservatorship, right? Take away the power that they have to make decisions for their own lives. Have you come across that?
Many, many times. The standard is very high for the probate judges. The probate judge has to be convinced that a conservatorship is what is known as the least restrictive means available to preserve someone's independence. And the probate court has to receive some evidence, and the threshold is clear and convincing evidence that a conservatorship is in fact the least restrictive means
So
available.
we just touched on one area of elder law that could be intersected with elder abuse and all the other issues. So let me turn to Chris now, because as the Director of Counseling Services, you have the best psychological background to tell us give us the definition of elder abuse and the different facets of it.
You know, it can be very broad. There are lots of different types of abuse. I think the most common that we see are emotional, physical, and financial abuse. But it's really any harm that is perpetrated against an elder, or any exploitation that may happen. You know, people in their lives may try to use their resources, you know, for themselves as opposed to caring for that person. And I think as people age, neglect becomes a really big concern as well. The more isolated a person is, the more at risk they are for neglect, whether that's neglect by their direct caretakers or even self-neglect. So that's something important to look out for as well.
Okay, give us some examples of emotional or psychological abuse.
Yeah, things like belittling someone, constantly criticizing them, telling a person that they're worthless or not good for anything anymore. Also, gaslighting, like trying to convince an elder that something is not happening when it is. Like maybe you are abusing them, but you try to convince that person that you're not. Manipulating them in that way is very abusive.
Okay, and what about when it gets to be more physical abuse, even sexual abuse in some circumstances?
Yeah, so I mean, physical abuse I think is just what it sounds like. It's any physical injury that's caused to a person. It can also be physical restraint, which I think people don't always think of. And sexual abuse can include a wide range of things, like forcing someone to watch pornography or sexual content that they don't want to, forcing sexual acts on someone, or even like objectifying someone sexually is very abusive.
Yeah. Let's take the example of someone who has family members and they're in their home. They're in their own home, but family members are helping them. But the family members are abusing them, both physically and financially. What are the resources in the community to start dealing with that?
Yeah, well, of course, Safe Futures is a resource. We have a 24-hour hotline. We have an emergency shelter, so if someone is in an unsafe environment and their goal is to get out of that environment, we can help with that, usually relatively quickly. But also within the community, I would say the Agency on Aging is a great resource. Most of the towns in our area have a community center, which is going to have a wealth of information and resources about things that are available to elders, as well as provide community and support, which is really what we all need to stay safe. Yeah. Connecticut Legal Services, if you need legal services, and our low income is also a fantastic resource.
Yeah, I think, Chris, in one of the talks you once gave, we talked about 10% of the about 10% of the elderly population in this country will be victimized in one way or another by some form of abuse. Is that the statistic that
Yeah, and that statistic is a little old, so that number might be even higher now. But it's not as uncommon as we would like to think it is.
Yeah, and let me turn to Mark, because the whole issue of financial abuse, I mean, the AARP just a couple of months ago, I don't know if you get, I get that magazine. My age, what do you get?
I too have graduated to the AARP
very good
club.
The entire main topic on the cover and the inside was on scamming
Yes.
the elderly. What can people do about that? And as an attorney, have you had cases where your clients have been scammed? I mean, I've heard of situations where the elderly have been, a group comes through town and says, we're going to build a dance hall for the seniors, because as you said, Elena, and we talked about, Ellen, as we talked about, seniors sometimes living alone and they're lonely. They need companionship. And someone comes along and says, we're going to build a dance club. And all of a sudden, their checkbook is minus $30,000 that they've donated, and then this company picks up and leaves and moves on to the next town. What are the resources of our criminal justice system, legal system, to deal with that when so many seniors are vulnerable to that kind of manipulation?
You know, I think there has to be some trusted person in an elder's life who's kind of got their eyeballs on the situation. I don't know who that is. I don't know if it's a friend or if it's a relative, son, daughter, you name it. Somebody has to check in. Somebody has to keep eyes on the situation. Chris was right. I mean, there are municipal agents. There are senior services coordinators. The police. Call the police. Have somebody drive by, do a well check or something on an elder just to see what's going on. But somebody who is trusted has to keep their eyes on the situation. And, you know, if it requires some intervention, then somebody has to be brave enough and courageous enough to get the ball rolling and involve other people, Department of Social Services, Elderly Protective Services, the police maybe. Somebody's got to intervene and act as a check and balance on that situation.
But that's one of the main issues. If they're lonely and they're isolated and they don't have the support system, so they have people who are trying to scam them, ferreting that out, bringing them out of the shadows, that is the hardest thing. That is so difficult.
It's hard because often the elder doesn't want to sort of put that out there themselves.
Right.
They're embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
you know, the technology, I know teaching my mother-in-law and my mother years ago how to work email, how to go on a computer, and there are a lot of elderly at home doing that, and they are being manipulated by all these scam artists that are online or through the telephone. Right?
Yeah.
A lot through the telephone.
A lot through the telephone.
A lot through the telephone.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
through the telephone. So, Elena, I apologize.
okay.
Elena. If someone's isolated and they haven't called the hotline at Safe Futures to say, I need help, or their neighbor who sees that something's amiss, and I'm going to ask you in a minute to tell us what are some of the warning signs of that. But how do you get involved? You need loving support systems to have the elderly get to you, don't you?
Oftentimes I have children or powers of attorney, neighbors, other relatives reaching out to me because they know somebody doesn't have the support that they need. And those are some of our most favorite clients because we provide that in between from where a child might be looking after their parent, or if there's an elder that has absolutely no support at all, or very limited support from family. So we just step in and we assess. First and foremost, the most important is assessing their care needs. And the second thing is taking a look at their finances and doing a snapshot and making sure that they're okay. Oftentimes, when they start working with us, they will confess that they have been scammed and they're afraid to tell their daughter or their son, that sort of thing. So just educating them, I feel like, is like the most important, and letting them know they're not alone. You know, it could happen to anybody, and oftentimes it does.
So tell me, give me the steps when someone comes to see you, either because they were referred through a neighbor or the children. They want help in placement, in services that they feel their loved one needs. Tell me what you do. Give me an example of a case situation.
From start to finish, we do a care assessment to make sure we know what their care needs are. Then we review their current financial situation, because we never want to provide options that they can't afford. Then we introduce, by way of information and education, all of the options that are suitable for them, so that they can make informed choices today that won't preclude them from services in the future. And also, oftentimes people, if they need to make a transition move, they don't want to make multiple moves, or they don't want to make a rash decision because they threw a dart at the wall, right? I heard that place is a wonderful place, and then they get there, they've run out of all of their money, and now they're in a nursing home. But if they came to somebody like myself, and oftentimes I work with Mark's firm all the time, to be able to do some creative planning so that we could take their finances and stretch them out and keep them in a environment that is more suitable to their choosing, while getting care in there that they may not be able to afford on their own.
All right. So have you come across cases where people, do you ever see someone who just has no resources, is isolated, has been abused, and how do you deal with that?
So oftentimes protective services will reach out, or they'll say you need to get some help. So I'm working with a couple of families right now, one in particular who the protective services person was trying to protect the elder, not realizing that the child in the home also wants to protect the elder, but just didn't have the resources or the information to know what to do. So his phone call to me allowed us to be able to support not only the elder, but also the child as well, trying to support the elder. So sometimes it's not insidious, and there's no malice intent. Sometimes it's just people don't know what to do.
Exactly. I've read so many cases, and I don't know, Mark, I have a whole list of cases that have gone to court over manipulation, over abuse by oftentimes relatives. And I've read so many cases of relatives who were well-meaning, who had the elderly aunt, mother, father in the home with them, but they didn't have the education to know how to handle them. And as the disease, whether it was Alzheimer's or dementia or other issues, worsened, they got frustrated. And sometimes the frustrated led to physical abuse, assault. I got so mad. I have a case that I read about here. I got so mad I had to go take Prozac, and I couldn't help it, and I hit her. Or I left the house for 2 days and left the aunt on the bathroom floor, almost dying. And these became criminal cases, but they arose not out of venality. They arose out of lack of education and the inability to understand the situation, to know how to properly care for their loved one. And it was probably too much for them to care for the loved one in the home, but they didn't know what other resources might have been available. Not everybody in our culture have the funds to maybe go see someone like Eleanor.
Right.
So that's what always comes to my mind. There are wonderful resources like you, and I can afford to go to Mark and get my estate plan done and tell my children what I'm leaving them, and so. But not every. So what do we do with that underbelly of our culture that we're trying to reach, say futures or other things? You answer that one.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, what do we do about it? I think. For me, the first step is always making connections. Like, I think isolation is really, it is the root of a lot of problems. Like, even when we're talking about things like, caregiver fatigue, or possible, I'm sorry, you were saying earlier that, in terms of like conservatorships, like one person might be trying to get a conservatorship in order to control everything, but the more people that are at the table, having those conversations, I think the safer that the elder is going to be, right? The more people in their corner, the more people that are looking to protect them, the less likely they are to burn out. And I think the more likely they are to hear the different ideas and solutions, that are coming to the table. So to me, the first step is always build relationships and making connections. In terms of specific resources, again, I think Connecticut Legal Services is a fantastic resource for elders who need help with a will or estate planning that cannot afford it. And also, maybe not so much with the financial planning pieces, but I think the senior centers are, again, a wealth of resources and information, so connecting to someone there. And I would also say, if you're a person who feels like, I don't need that much help, that's okay, but someone might need your help. So even if you're not going to a senior center because you want the services, go to be a support for someone else if you're able to do that. Go to be a part of the community and a shoulder, for someone else to lean on.
Okay, so I want to get back to the thing I wanted to ask you about before. That is, what are the warning signs of someone who you think is being abused, an elder person?
Yeah, so signs of physical abuse tend to be a little more obvious, unexplained injuries, or if someone, it's not necessarily a sign of abuse, but if you're noticing lapses in memory or trouble keeping appointments, things like that, I would say that is a warning sign that someone is more vulnerable to abuse. So I would put in a little more time and attention with them. If there are sudden changes in their environment or their financial situation, if they're, for example, typically, have lunch with their church group every Tuesday and all of a sudden they're not coming, they're saying like, oh, I don't really have the money, I can't afford it, like sudden unexpected changes, I would say warrant looking into. They could be a sign of financial abuse or that someone is controlling or manipulating them.
Okay, so Elena.
Yes.
Your work is wonderful for the people who are getting something out of it. What percentage of the elderly population do you think can be reached by the kind of thing that you do?
That's a great question. I don't even know how to answer that. But I do want to say that the Agency on Aging here in Connecticut is very robust. In this area, the division is Senior Resources. It's right in Norwich here. I've worked with them years ago and served on committees, and I have a healthy respect for what they do. And that is the first place somebody could go who can't afford my services. So when they call me, the first thing I'm going to do is have an a first initial consultation on the telephone. If they're not a good fit for me, or they need something more immediate than I cannot handle, it is definitely always a referral to the Agency on Aging. They have a plethora of services that somebody can tap into, and sometimes they can get something done immediately before they can get something done long term. And a little bit of help right away is better than no help at all. So I would say that would be a really good start. Protective Services is a phenomenal division of the Department of Social Services, and they're a good barometer for if there's something really not unsavory going on or maybe unsatisfactory. Some people that are just isolated or physically they become unable to care for themselves and not realizing or defiant, right? They think they've got it, and they end up in an impossible situation. And if somebody doesn't reach in, like you were saying, and help them, they might fall victim to something else. So I think those are two agencies that don't cost anything, that are readily available for anybody that is either concerned about somebody or really could use some support. Yeah. And they could go there before they come to me. They can call me at any time, but that would be a really good support.
So you have at your ready
always
names of resources, people who can take care of that.
Throughout the entire state of Connecticut, right? Because there's an Agency on Aging that fits each group.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know what those resources
So
are.
one of the things, and Chris, you can talk about that we're trying to do with Safe Futures, we're starting the Family Justice Center, or the Center for Safe Futures, we're calling it, which is a Family Justice Center where all of the agencies that deal with issues of family issues, domestic violence, and elderly abuse now too, will be in a one building, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, so the Family Justice Center model is a best practice in victim services, and the idea is to bring service providers into one building. And the reason that co-locating services is so important is, one, it helps us work better as a team. So service providers are communicating more frequently, and we're working better to provide wraparound services to those survivors. But also, it minimizes the number of places that a survivor has to go to get the help they need. You know, if we have an advocate and a prosecutor and a food bank and a social worker all in one building, that's one place you have to go to get all of those services instead of 5.
Yeah,
which
and
for
someone like
people,
Elena might be there, and someone like Mark might be there to
Absolutely.
help, so that all of the aspects of one's life that need to get worked on are right in that same place. That's great. That's what we're building in Waterford right now, right?
Yes.
All right. So let me turn to more. I've heard stories, I think I read that 30% of the nursing homes in this country have at least one complaint on abuse of the elderly population, whether, again, it is intentional or accidental, whether it's a neglect or purposeful harm. Have you heard about that? And have you been involved in any cases that deal with that?
That's not the kind of work I do.
Okay.
I know there are lawyers out there who do that kind of work, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, you know, being married to a geriatric social worker, that I hear about those complaints all the time. It's hard to sort of know what the facts are sometimes, because, you know, sometimes you have a resident who, you know, they're sort of complaining about things that really don't justify complaining about.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of other residents who are complaining about things that are very justifiable. And we're kind of spread thin in this society. The cost of nursing, the average cost of a nursing home in Connecticut now is what, $14,000 a month, I think?
Up there,
Oh,
yeah.
God, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, these guys are running on tight margins. It's hard to employ qualified people to do all this work, so it's hard to staff these institutions sometimes. And now, since COVID, it seems like nobody wants to go to the office anymore. They all want to work from home.
Yeah.
So it's hard to staff a nursing
Yeah.
home, a skilled nursing facility, with people who are going to take care of the elderly. So that means you have that many fewer people actually looking after
Yeah.
older and sicker people.
But
And-
I think there's a push in our country, in our culture, to see if we can do more with home care, keep people in their homes.
That'd be
And as I
ideal.
was saying in the introduction, you know, there are other countries, especially in the Asian communities, the elders live with them. There's no nursing homes, you know, sending them off. And the question becomes, why is it we are so dependent on our youth and celebrity, and what do we do? Are we sending our elderly off because we don't want to think about our mortality, or what? I mean, these are philosophical questions, but they have a lot to do with how we treat our elderly and what kind of services we have for them. So I know the nursing home situation can be really terrible.
It's a complicated answer. I mean, you know, families are fractured now. They're all over the country, sometimes all over the world. Some people are capable of taking care of an elder, some people aren't. Some people get along, some people don't. Some people work and they're very busy, so they have limited time. It's such a complicated stew, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So there's no easy answer, I guess, in this culture that we live in here in the United States.
So let me ask you to give us just a little elementary summary of what you do. I know that as a lawyer, people don't like lawyers sometimes, right? But basically what we do is fix up problems when you don't take care of them in the first place, right?
Right.
You mess up your life and we go try to fix it. Is that right?
So I often describe myself as a plumber with a briefcase, because that's what I do. And you're right, we do a lot of fixing of problems that were created by situations where people sometimes kick the can down the road.
Right. We didn't pay attention to what needed to be
Exactly.
done. Lots of lawyers didn't have wills, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Optometrists don't have eyeglasses. Dentists have messy
Yeah.
teeth.
It's the
Psychiatrists commit
the shoemaker's
suicide.
children, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's not an uncommon phenomenon.
Right.
But just give us an idea. So you have an elderly couple. They have a little bit of an estate. They have a home. They have some money. They've got grandkids. They're still both alive. What do they need from your services?
Well, to initiate the process with an elderly couple like that, we have this proprietary form that is specific to our firm that we send out to people, and we have them populate that form with information about themselves, their health, their family, even their pets, their advisors,
Right.
their tax advisor, their financial advisor. We want to know who these trusted people are because we often work in a collaborative way with these people, as Elena knows. We want to know what their assets are. We want to know how their beneficiaries are designated. We can't, we're like doctors. We can't help you unless you tell us everything about your situation, and then we can sort of think of a plan that is best suited to protect your assets and maybe leave a legacy for your loved ones.
Right. And you want to maybe have a choice in what's going to happen to your stuff after you die. I mean, it's
Yeah.
as simple as that. Why not plan that? But some people feel it's expensive if they don't have not everybody has the resources to do that. And so there are so many people who die without wills. And then tell us what happens when you die without, you're intestate, without a will.
Sure, yeah.
What happens? Then maybe the families start arguing over what to do with the assets.
I mean, the laws of intestacy control in the state of Connecticut,
Right.
and so the statutes are going to dictate where your assets are going to go when you die. But, a lot of people, we've created a lot of plans for people who come to us and say, I know what the laws of intestacy say, but this is how I want to leave my estate. I mean, there are people who come to us and they specifically want to disinherit people or leave
Right.
chunks of money to charities. It's their prerogative, completely their prerogative to
Right.
do that. But, not to be overlooked in this whole process is, along with estate planning, go a lot of other kinds of decisions, such as advanced
Health.
directives.
I was going to ask you about that.
Right,
Absolutely.
and those things, those things are equally as important as someone's will or their
Well,
trust.
tell us about that end-of-life planning and how important that is for seniors to be involved in.
Yeah, it's important because while you're still here and lucid, you get to call the shots. And you get to say to the world, hey, if I ever get into this situation here, this is who I want my decision maker to be. If you choose not to create that plan for yourself, at some point down the road, somebody is going to make that decision for you, probably a probate judge, and they might end up appointing someone who you don't know at all, who is going to end up being the decision maker for you. And that might not be what you want for yourself. So it's always best to have a choice in your own plan.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, one of the shortfalls, I think, in our education system, I don't know about you guys, when I was in high school, we took a class in how to make a family budget. I don't know if they do that now. Did you take a class in how to do a family budget?
No,
How
I
to
do
think
not remember
right.
doing that.
Right. I think it's kind of important. People are getting married at 18, 19, 20. They're setting up households, and they don't know anything about finances and how to deal with them. So there should be some way we educate our young people that think about, nobody wants to think about end-of-life issues. But, how many people, do you know how many people go through life without a plan at all?
Oh, I think it's
Mostly?
funny. You mentioned the 30% number a little while ago
Yeah.
in another context. The last time I heard any statistic at all on this, it was somewhere around 30% of all people in the United States actually have a written plan for
Right.
themselves.
So that means 70% do not.
7
well,
out of 10
course,
people.
We have to recognize that we do have a socioeconomic section of our culture that doesn't have any money. There's some people who can't put together $200, right? So what are they planning for? But no, you're right. It's only 30%. Interesting.
Yeah,
Educate.
that's the last statistic I heard on the
Okay.
subject.
All right.
That's not that many.
So we need to go from evaluating the problem with Christine, getting Safe Futures to help us know what other resources are in the community, leading to what Elena can do, and then leading to what Mark can do to put a final program together for your financial life, your stuff, which is very important. And sometimes when you do that, you figure out who your family is too, right? Right? You figure out who are the family members that you're going to have to deal with while you're doing this process. So let's go around and talk about wrapping up a little bit. This is the beginning of this task force. What do you think, Chris, we need to do more of to recognize this problem and to get the community, people like us and other people involved in it?
Yeah, I think a lot of community education, we need to be talking about it more. We need to reduce some of the stigma around things like scams. Like as Elena said, anyone can be the victim of a scam. Like that is not unique to elders. And the technology and processes that scammers use are only getting more and more sophisticated. So I think the more open we are about acknowledging that and talking, as a community, how do we support our elders? I think you mentioned earlier the age of our population is growing. So in the not too distant future, the number of people over the age of 65 will outnumber the number of people under the age of 18. And that's a really interesting reality, and is going to pose a lot of challenges. Like as Mark talked about, we don't have enough people to care for our elders as it stands now. So how are we going to do that when there's such a shift in the age of our population? I think we really need to just start talking about it more, a lot of community education, and start thinking through some of those plans.
Okay. And one thing, we put the Safe Futures hotline on the screen, but we want to make sure that that's not just for someone who feels that they are in trouble. What if you are a loved one, a neighbor, a friend, and you see what you consider, what you evaluate to be abuse going on? What resources do you have? Can you call the Safe Futures hotline? Would that be a good resource?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are worried about somebody's safety and you just want to talk that through with someone to say, what are the resources? Where can I go? What kind of safety plan can I help come up with to keep this person safe? You should definitely call us.
Okay, great. All right, so Elena, I said it right. I got you anyway. What are your challenges for your work? I mean, to expand your purview of what you do, or what you think needs to be done in your profession?
So I think that education is really powerful, right? I think that when people understand what their options are, it becomes less of a fearful conversation. Most people are afraid to have the conversation because they don't think that they can afford a good plan. And honestly, it's more affordable to plan, and you know this. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir with you, Mark, all day long.
You are correct.
Yeah, it's more affordable, and you save more money by educating yourself and coming up with a plan, and you eliminate the worry. So there's so many people that say, I can't afford it. You can't afford not to do it. That's so important to understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mark, what are the challenges in your profession? If you had your druthers, what are the things, how would you change things or reach out to the elderly community that you work with? What do you think?
First of all, I think programs like this are excellent. I think if we have more of this kind of thing, we can reach more people. I have personally gone into senior centers, nursing homes. I put on talks on various topics. I think if more of us do that kind of thing, we reach more people. My firm has a newsletter that we send out on a quarterly basis. Every 3 months, we publish a newsletter on some topic in the area of elder law, probate court law, estate planning, something that we feel is beneficial for the masses, so to speak.
What was the big topic in the last newsletter? What did you talk about?
I think, I'm embarrassed to say, I'm the guy who authored that newsletter. And I think what I did was I analyzed a couple of recent cases that came down the pike in late 2022, and I can't remember the fact patterns off the top of my head.
So what? Just tell us what type of cases would come through the courts.
What type of cases
Yeah.
come through the court? Well, there's a lot of financial exploitation, a lot of
Okay.
will contests. So a lot of the issues that we talked about here. I had one case several years ago where I had family who isolated an elder and prevented other family from having any contact with the elder. While they were isolating the elder, they were manipulating the
Yeah,
elder
well,
and having her redo estate plan documents that did not reflect her intent. I've had other cases where somebody had a power of attorney, a child. The parent was, non-compos mentis. The child with POA was changing beneficiary designation, setting up joint accounts so that when mom or dad passed away, all of a sudden they became the owner of the asset.
Right.
I've had situations where, mom does a power of attorney here at this point in time. 5 years later, another child takes mom to another lawyer to do a power of attorney
For
where
them.
there's a brand new agent magically named, not the agent listed in the first power of attorney. And in between those 2 points in time, mom is showing cognitive decline.
So what happens when you have competing powers of attorney?
Well, now you've got a probate court fight,
That's
and
right.
now you're going to have to leave it up to some judge to decide. But for me, the difficulty, and I've always said this, is if you can reach the children of the elderly and invite them in to have a global discussion about, let's have a plan for mom and dad that's fair and makes sense. Let's have everybody be, sitting at the table and let's talk about it. But it's very hard to get people to sort of buy in to that or to carve out the time to do the right thing. And Elena is exactly right. I mean, the cost to create a plan is relatively negligible as compared to what the cost could be down the road if you have no, plan at all.
Right.
And then it's just a fight.
Right.
There's bad blood and many, many
Right.
thousands of dollars going out the window
So
to
what
solve
you're
a problem.
what you're all showing is that we, just like domestic violence having to do with younger people and children, socioeconomic position in life means nothing. It stretches over all facets of our culture, from the wealthiest who abuse their elderly, to the middle class, to people in the shadows who are isolated, living alone, and have nothing. It's a problem that deals with all facets of our socioeconomic society, right? That's a very important point to make. It's not just the isolated nursing home, left alone population. You've got wealthy people who are being manipulated by their children, by these scam artists in the community, by the internet, by the telephone, and so forth. And they've got, well, they're the ones that have the buck, so they're the ones that are being manipulated the most. So it's a multifaceted issue that deals with many different parts of our society. And hopefully through Safe Futures and this group, we're going to have a united front in how to start dealing with it. Okay. Any final thoughts? Just a final comment before we leave.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I can't stress it enough. Just build relationships and connection. I think the more isolated you are, the more at risk you are. So whether it's friends, families, community groups, church groups, or other faith-based groups, wherever you can build relationships and have people in your life, that's going to be a protective factor.
Elena?
I'm going to piggyback off of this. I literally called my mom right before I was coming here today. I'm like, hey, haven't heard from you in a few minutes. How you doing? I'm busy gardening. I got to go. But it was good to hear her voice, right? And I think, if we make it a point to reach out and say hello, you don't have to have a reason. Just say hello. Check in on people. Yeah, check in on people.
Mark?
So we had a president in our country, his name was Ronald Reagan. Love him or hate him, he used to be known as the great communicator. Communication is the key. We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to our parents, our aunts and uncles. We need to know what they want. We need to help them.
Right.
We need to talk.
Right, and we need to recognize that as we age, you have to think about those issues. And
Right.
sometimes we don't want to, and that's understandable. So it's tough. Okay, I'm so glad for this panel. We'll be back again. I think next time we'll concentrate on one specific issue. But keep in mind, Safe Futures, 860-701-6001. For you, for a friend, for a relative, for information. You don't have to call when you think it's an emergency, right, Christine? You can call just to get information and to ask a question about what services are offered, okay? We'll see you all next time on Talkback. Bye. Thank you.